A good life is a life built around fulfilling work, play, relationships, and lifelong learning. Welcome to Good Life Conversations, where we explore the stories and strategies of inspiring everyday people who are striving to create a life of purpose, meaning, and connection. Hi there, welcome to this Good Life Conversation. My name is Jay. I'm your host and the founder of Discover Year, and today's guest is Shawn Smith. Welcome, Shawn.
Hi, Jay. Thanks for having me.
Shawn, what an interesting person. Shawn is the founder and owner of a business called Don't Diss My Ability Consulting Services. And what an interesting name, you might say. We'll understand a little bit what that means. But Shawn has a master's in educational counseling. He lives in New Brunswick, and he has ADHD and has recently, as an adult, been diagnosed with autism. So we'll talk a little bit about neurodiversity, undoubtedly. And as you might have guessed by now, that's the focus of his work in his consulting business. So he works with people who are neurodiverse, trying to help them leverage their strengths and their unique gifts, which I think is really cool. So Shawn and I met at a conference for counselors actually a number of years ago, and he was, I think, wearing his t-shirt with the name of his company. I thought that was so interesting, and we chatted, and he was a really interesting person and very vulnerable and open about his experience. So I thought he'd be a great role model for students at Discover Year, because we do have a lot of students who are neurodiverse. So Shawn, let's dive in, and we'll talk about a lot of things, but we always like to start with, let's hear about your typical day. What time do you get up? Do you have morning routines? How much work do you do in the day? If it's a work day, how do you wind down? What time do you go to bed?
Sure. So, being a parent, I find a lot of it revolves actually around my kids. So, getting my kids up in the morning, usually around 6 o'clock, I'll get my daughter up, do meds, get ready for the day. Part of my routine is making everybody breakfast and lunch. Like I call cooking my therapy. And
Mhm.
so I kind of like hop into the kitchen. I'm a short order cook, whipping different things up for breakfast. I mean, anything from egos to omelets to you name it. They kind of put in their order, and I'm happy to do it. And so, kind of it brings me joy to do those things for my family. Is kind of how I show my love for them. And then once everybody's gone, I usually will kind of shower, get ready for the day. And my day could start at 9 a.m. It could start at 1 p.m. It really just depends on my schedule for the day. Um, Usually I would wrap up around 5 o'clock. That my last session would be from 4 to 4:45. So, I'm usually home in time to cook supper, get everything ready and on the table for everybody. Wind down time in the evening. Usually it starts with, getting my daughter ready for bed. We kind of do our routine at the same time, and we end up going to bed around the same time. So that's kind of my wind down. I would say not always the healthiest of choices. Like sometimes I'll scroll on my phone, do stuff like that to wind down, just to kind of not think about the thousand things that are cycling around in my brain, to just kind of focus on one thing.
Mhm.
But my day looks different day to day, and I think I'm at the point now where it's kind of the dream where I work part time but I earn full time. um, so it's because I charge by the hour, and because of my experience and where I'm at, I can charge a certain amount of money, which means that I don't have to work as much if I don't want to. But I also, even though people who are neurodivergent really thrive on structure, consistency, and routine. For some people, it's like Miss America, or for other people, it's the ugly witch. For me, if I do the same thing all day every day, I get bored and then I get resentful. So like the counseling is one part of what I do. I also consult, guest lecturer. I've been a guest lecturer at Florida State, University of Miami, University of Connecticut. Um, so I really kind of thrive on doing a lot of different things.
Yeah. And what time do you go to bed usually?
I would say probably between 9 and 10,
Okay.
usually.
Yeah. Nice. I too like to do a lot of different things to get very bored by doing the same thing, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. And I'd love to circle back to that in a moment. Um, but I would love to ask you. So it sounds like you kind of get up, and the first order of business is taking care of the family. So I wonder, what was your kind of morning routine prior to having kids, if you can remember, and And is this something that has kind of taken over and is meaningful to you, or are you just doing it because you have to? Tell us about that.
It's meaningful to me, but I would say that over the years it is very like I've had 24 different jobs.
Mm,
So, and in different parts of Canada and the United States. So depending on where I was able to kind of adapt to the situation. But I would say that all of those experiences have kind of led me to where I'm at now.
mm,
And even, you know, being a therapeutic foster parent for at-risk youth when my wife and I had only been married for a year, right? Raising other people's kids while most newlyweds are picking out new homes or patio furniture, right? We moved to a foreign country to take care of these kids. So we learned a lot from those types of experiences, and that was one. We also worked in the territories twice at a residential treatment facility for at-risk youth. So like having a lot of experience with other kids and really kind of enjoying the fact that I got to wear flip-flops and shorts to work. I got to cook in like industrial kitchens because of the size of the facility. So I got access to a lot of neat stuff, and also watching the reaction on the kids' faces when I would make something. Like before I had my own kids, I love chicken parmesan, so I have my own recipe. I call it chicken parmesan, uh, and so watching the kids' reactions of them tasting something and seeing their expression on their face and not really seeing that in other ways,
mm,
really kind of gave me this warm, fuzzy feeling of, things in their lives maybe crap in a lot of ways, but in this one moment, they ate this and it took them to some place that I'd never seen them go before. Maybe they hadn't really experienced themselves. And that's something that even to this day, Jay, like I call myself an amateur chef and chocolatier. Like I make cherry cordial chocolates from scratch. Like if my wife knew how much money I spend on high-end chocolate, she'd she'd not be happy. But like I buy presents for my immediate family, but for friends and extended family, like I make cherry chocolates from scratch. Like I'll make my own fondant, dip the cherries. I temper chocolate. And this is all stuff that I taught myself. But it's for me, it's a joy of like giving it away and seeing um, how it makes people feel because people don't really give homemade stuff like that anymore. Like
mm,
I used to go to a funeral and the old church ladies would make, the sandwiches and now everything just comes from Costco. It's kind of like
mm.
this lost art form from society that's gone. So I really kind of try to tap into that and make it my own. And that's really my therapy.
Yeah. I'd love to hear about why it's your therapy or like how it's therapeutic for you. But before we get to that, it sounds like you've known that you've enjoyed cooking and giving food to people for a long time. So did you ever consider that as a profession?
No. Well, I shouldn't say no. I worked at A&W and McDonald's, McDonald's in high school, A&W after I graduated from my BA. But uh, my brother-in-law was a chef, and I saw the amount of hours that he put in and how little he got out of that.
Mm,
And so, really, the joy for me, and I've had people ask me if they could buy my stuff, and the answer is always no for a couple of different reasons. One is if they knew how much I actually spent, they probably wouldn't buy it. But two, that's for me is when the joy is gone because then there's an obligation and it's not a fun thing. It's not something I feel like I want to do. It then becomes something I have to do,
mm,
and I don't want or need that type of pressure.
mm. Yeah, we have another mentor who's a coach and facilitator in many ways, kind of similar to the work that you and I do in this world of helping people, but in a slightly different way. And he told us about how when he started doing magic as part of his career, he lost some of the joy. So there's an overlap there that I think a lot of people can probably connect to. So something for young people to think about is do I want to keep this as a hobby or do I want to invest and make it something I work at all the time?
Mhm.
So what is it about cooking that is therapeutic for you? Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So when I first started my business, I was doing something different. I had to pivot at a certain point in time, but I remember sitting at my computer and I needed to essentially write these reports, and I just was staring at my computer and nothing was happening. I was just wasting time, right? And I just remember kind of having this conversation with myself, like, would it be better for me to be doing something where I feel like I'm being productive or sit here and do nothing and just feel worse about myself for not getting this thing done? So I found that by going into my kitchen and cooking something elaborate where it took all of my concentration. And this is where, like, if I was just making eggs or something simple, like that's not going to do it. But if I'm making hard candy with flavoring and I need to add citrus acid to make it a little more tart, like this is it's a process and it's a labor of love. So the idea is that because my mind gets so into it, because if I don't, I'm going to make a mistake. I have to invest all of my brain power into this. I'm not thinking about that other thing. And when I'm finished that process of cooking and I have that end result, I can then go back and look at the thing that I was struggling with through a completely different lens and mindset.
Hmm. That's so interesting because as you're saying that to me, for me, it's movement. It's physical exercise that helps me. But in fact, what it does is puts me in a different physical space. But I find that the freedom of letting my thoughts go where they want is helpful. So it's different. What you're describing is slightly different. Anyways, it's probably too in depth for a talk like this. But to see for you, it's important that you not think at all about what you were trying to achieve previously. And for me, it's just going to a different space helps me think better or more productively about the thing that I was trying to do when I was blocked. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I kind of describe it as, and this is why fidgets exist, right? Is busy the hands, free the mind,
Hmm.
right? And that's what happens. We keep our hands busy and our minds are able to kind of let go and just be free. Absolutely. I don't have it. I have a deck of cards that I taught myself how to spring cards and do different like sleight of hand stuff. Um, yeah, it's pretty
Nice.
neat.
Yeah. Oh, that was when I learned that I had ADHD. People had been telling me about the fidgeting forever, but I didn't quite connect it. And then, the spinning the pen and everything. So yeah. Anyways, that's another rabbit hole. But okay, that's really cool. So it sounds like you kind of start your day and end your day a lot of basically with cooking pretty much every day. Yeah.
Now that you mention it, yeah,
Yeah. Interesting.
yeah.
So that's obviously what I would consider a hobby for you. I don't know if you would consider it a hobby. Are there other hobbies that you like to use to kind of free your mind, take yourself away from things and achieve some balance?
Uh, like I would say that the most effective has been cooking. Like there have been other things that I've tried, but I haven't experienced the same level of success with because when I'm making something, it just I never make something simple. Like it's a pretty intricate process. So and I'm not handy. So like I don't have the skill set to like, you know, do woodworking or stuff like that. So I would say for me it's more, yeah, it's I've just kind of figured out it's cooking. So that's where I kind of invest and spend my time. Like I will cycle through things within cooking. So I hosted a pizza palooza at my house a few weeks ago. We had these uni portable pizza ovens that make like really great quality uh, pizza, and so I've gotten into making like different types of dough. And I mean, you again another rabbit hole. But I go through phases different times of year. So like in November, I'll start to get ready for like Christmas baking, chocolate stuff like that. In the summertime, I'll get more into the pizza and having friends over and trying out different pizza doughs and sauces and all kinds of stuff.
Mm,
And so another theme, I guess, would be, finding those people who mean enough to me to share it with.
mm. So it's two parts. It's like the actual activity of turning off one part of your brain and allowing another to flourish, and then also sharing it. That's if you just made it and never shared it, it would be less satisfying to you.
Absolutely.
Hmm. Very cool. Yeah. Thank you. And I'd love to hear more about this idea for you. So mentioned earlier that you've known you have ADHD for quite some time, but more recently you found out you were also diagnosed with autism. And this idea of doing a lot of different things and getting bored by doing the same thing every day. Have you known that about yourself? Can you tell us a little bit about that evolution? Like how did you come to know it and to seemingly embrace that rather than say, oh, I need to do one thing only? How did you come to really embrace that you need different things?
So it takes me back again to sitting in front of the computer and not feeling productive and feeling, the messages that we've been told that you need to sit at a desk from 9 to 5. You need to be tethered there in order to be productive. And we actually know that that's not reality. People aren't really being productive from 9 to 5. But just it's kind of like we have these imaginary shackles on that kind of keep us tethered to that type of mentality. And so I just had this epiphany, like this very liberating moment where I just said, you know what? I'm not going to accept these expectations that I feel society is putting on me, and recognize that there are things that I could do in an hour or two that could take somebody else a week. So why am I punishing myself for feeling like I'm not being productive when in reality I've done a lot in a very short period of time? So recognizing that I might do in 2 hours worth of work that might take somebody else 8 hours. So I got rid of kind of the guilt and shame associated with not feeling productive, and would spend that time, going to play golf or going to the driving range, or, doing something with my kids.
Hmm. It sounds like for you, there's kind of like two possibilities. Once a person perhaps recognizes that they can achieve, a day's work in let's say half the time. Sometimes that we realize, oh, well, like other people are taking 8 hours of this, I can do it in 4. So some people might have the mentality, well, great, I can do 2 days worth of work in one day, make more money, be more productive. Sounds like you've said, okay, well, no, I can use that other part of the day to do other things. Was that a conscious choice for you, or did you ever think, oh, I can just double my kind of production?
I didn't necessarily think about doubling my production, but I guess the way that I put it was, again, the messages that are conveyed to people with ADHD, particularly inattentive type, that we are lazy or that we're procrastinators. And so I came to realize that I actually do my best work on a tight deadline. So I like to use the analogy, if there's a 4 week contract out and they're willing to pay somebody for 4 weeks, if it takes somebody else 4 weeks to do it, it only takes me 2 days. Does that make me a procrastinator, or does that make them a sucker?
Yeah.
Right. So again, so just being very self-aware that if I started on the first week, I could start hot and heavy, but then I'm going to drop off in week 2 and week 3. By the time I get to the real deadline that I should have just had to begin with, I've gone through all this mental anguish leading up
Mm,
to that. Why do that to myself?
mm.
So creating deadlines that are realistic based on the my being productive in the time that I need in order to do that, and knowing that the 2 days that I'm going to do that may be better quality than the person who actually spent 4 weeks.
So procrastination, as you might not be surprised to hear, is a pretty popular topic at our sessions at Discovery Year, and many of our young people in the program highlight the fact that they're aware that they procrastinate and they're struggling with that. So, from your perspective, did you ever struggle with this fact that you would leave things to the last minute and you would cram them in, or did you accept that pretty early? And any advice you have for people who are either have ADHD or not, but just tend to procrastinate? What advice would you offer?
Um, well, I try to reframe things. So I don't think that the term procrastinator is necessarily used correctly. I think that information is relayed in a way that we may not process as efficiently as others. And so a lot of it can be miscommunication because people are talking to us in a way that maybe we don't process. So I know for me, I'm a visual kinesthetic learner. I don't need somebody to tell me how to do something. In fact, if someone starts to give me oral instructions, I'll just stop them. This is a waste of my time and yours. I need you to show me. I need to screw it up, and then I will master it. And that's my process. So
Mm,
when you have a better understanding of what your process is, you then know what your needs are. The procrastination comes from something being vague or abstract and not really being able to wrap our minds around it and putting it off. If something was clear and concise and we understood each step involved in doing that task,
hmm.
it would be much easier to do.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. I resonate with that too. The idea of I drift off pretty quickly if someone's giving me complicated instructions on how to do something, and I prefer to give it a whirl myself. Um, okay, so I think another interesting topic here is, you own your own business, and, like every business owner, it's not all rainbows and butterflies for you. There's ups and downs. But, for the person out there who might really be struggling with executive functioning and, thinking, wow, I can't get organized, I'm a procrastinator, whatever it might be. What would you say to them? What was the arc of your kind of entrepreneurial journey? How did you get to the place where you're now, a successful entrepreneur?
Through a lot of failure. And I don't think that realistically people talk about that a lot. Like, so I make a point of doing that. Like, um, social media has a way of making things seem better than they are, and oftentimes that's people's perception of who we are. So I like to say it's a lot more than headshots and one-liners. You're seeing the polished product. You're not seeing every traumatic event that has happened leading up to this. Like this will be my 10th year in business. I've only been profitable for three.
Mm.
So, my wife was working three jobs and we still weren't making ends meet, right? So having that financial burden just compounding and we I was confident in my abilities and knowing like this is what we were working towards. But in the time to get there, the hell that people go through, you know, only another entrepreneur really is going to understand. Um, and if they don't, it's somebody else's money and they're not doing it right. But because it will sink you to the depths of the depression that really another entrepreneur will understand. Like the highs will get you high and the lows will sink you. So I think, finding other people that you can relate to are extremely important. But I talked really openly about not knowing where the next check was going to come from and going to Costco with what little money I had and buying big cans of tomato and making a lot of tomato sauce and eating a lot of pasta and my kids still having a Christmas and not knowing that we were struggling financially and all that stuff. So now it's super gratifying. We weren't able to go on vacation a lot. I've gone to Florida three different times to speak. The fourth time I could actually afford to bring my family. So to bring my family to be able to share those experiences with them was pretty awesome.
Yeah, 7 years of not knowing. I mean, it's great to hear these stories and to share them because, almost all the time, successful people, if we have long enough conversations, they will always say that overnight success does not exist, and yet it still permeates
Absolutely.
everywhere. So it's really, I appreciate you sharing that. And so what would you say for someone what's the most important thing for someone to consider if they want to start? Obviously, you didn't start thinking, okay, I want to have 7 years of not making money. You endured that because there was something else that was meaningful to you in this journey. So what would you suggest to someone who's thinking about starting their own company? What do they need to do?
Uh, well, it kind of depends where they're at, but what I like to do is like, what is your idea? And one of the things that I do is I've invested $500 of my own money in different individuals who have ideas for micro businesses. A lot of times they're people who are on social assistance and trying to get off. So being able to help them start a small business will help. But generally, if people have a job, what I encourage them to do is not, it's never black and white. You want to set yourself up for success. So if you have an idea, think about how you can turn that into a part-time business and then try to find resources in the startup community because there are tons out there. There's grant money, there's different accelerators, there's different things that you can get involved in. And sometimes there's free money attached to those that you can tap into that will also help your business. So get yourself set up to the point where, you have a decision to make. Do you want to stay at this job that maybe doesn't fulfill, your desires to do more? And a lot of times the people who are closest to us actually discourage us from starting our own business because it's a risk. And that full-time permanent job with benefits is seen as security, and people don't want us to take risks. Um, but we have difficulty settling for things. So it kind of depends on the person's point of entry, but I always try to take a strategic approach, do lots of research, have lots of conversations with people. I think sometimes people are afraid of sharing their idea because they'll think somebody will steal it. That hasn't really been the experience in my case. Often, most people have actually already had that idea,
Mm.
but maybe they just haven't done something with it. So, trying to get them connected to someone maybe outside in my network who might be able to assess their competency in a certain area that may be outside of my wheelhouse to get real world experience on what's actually happening in a certain industry.
Yeah, it's great. There's always this debate, right? Like, do you need to, cut the anchor from the boat and like no return in order to be effective in starting your business, or do you want to start a side hustle and build it up? And there's no right or wrong, obviously, answer to that. It partly depends on the industry and the personality, but certainly trying stuff on the side, I found was really useful as well. Okay, I'd love to hear for you, maybe just if you can briefly tell us, a little bit about your journey, understanding you have ADHD and then autism, because, like I said, we have a lot of listeners, a lot of students who are neurodivergent. So tell us a little bit about how you kind of uncovered these things and how you've leveraged them.
Sure. So I was only diagnosed with ADHD and attentive type, I think when I was 30. And so when people ask me what my life was like before that time, I call it the Neanderthal era, slightly less evolved version of myself. And I always preface this by saying, like, I'm an extreme example. Not everybody's going to have the same experiences that I did. Um, but medication basically took my thought process from dial up to fiber op. Like it took me 4 years to finish 3 years of high school. So 32 attempts during the 18 credits required to graduate. I failed grade 10 math 4 times. If you'd asked my parents which one of me or my siblings would have gone on to post secondary, it would have been my brother, my sister, the cat, the dog, and then Shawn.
Hmm.
Um, my first year of grade 12, I started playing football. My second year, I was an all star. I played hockey and golf all my life growing up. I never got any better. I just got bigger. And football was something that I experienced immediate success in. And this was the first time in my life that I ever had this type of success. Um, I got recruiting packages from every major Canadian university of the football team. And it was such a high and then such a low because as I'm opening up each one of these packages, I had a 49% average when I graduated, and you needed a 60 or 70% to get in. A Cégep, John Evatt College on the West Island of Montreal, started recruiting at a province for the first time in the school's history. The defensive coordinator was also the head registrar, and they took a chance on me and they snuck me in. I had an academic coach, and ironically did better in a foreign city than I did living under my parents' roof, which was also kind of foreign to me. But I got to take classes that I was more interested in, like psychology, sociology, stuff like that. Managed to bring my grades up enough to move back home and attend university. Still undiagnosed. Graduated with a 2.3 GPA. Um, then fast forward to having a ton of life experiences, 24 different jobs that have led me to this career, this job that I have now. But getting diagnosed in the territories of all places, I get into a dispute with my employer. And when shit would hit the fan, I was the person that they would call in. He didn't want to pay me the overtime for writing the report that I needed to write. And so my response was simple: okay, don't call me in. I'm not going to come. Like, we don't like to get got or feel like we're taken advantage of. And the therapist who worked at the center at the time, I went to her and said, I think I might have ADHD. And she wrote me a letter. I took to the health center. Things work a little bit differently in the territories. I was prescribed Ritalin right away without any form of assessment. And I literally felt it tingling in my brain.
Hmm.
Like, the best way that I can describe it is that if you can imagine living in this intense fog and then all of a sudden the fog just lifts. So another way that I put it, Jay, is like if you think of an attic you climb into and you pull the string and you see, the what the light shines on. Well, what medication essentially did was put lights in different corners. That stuff was always there. I just couldn't access it. And so all of a sudden, the pieces of the puzzle that were my life that never seemed to fit, all of a sudden just kind of came together with relative ease. And so, um, just kind of like this awakening, really, in me realizing I'm not dumb. I'm actually quite smart. And so that's one of the challenges of having an invisible disability, is that the change happened, but people still knew me as this certain way,
Hmm.
right? And so navigating those types of relationships, but getting applying to a master's program, diagnosed. I had to take 5 classes to upgrade as a mature student, earned a new GPA of 3.7, and then got into the master's program on academic probation and graduated a year later at the top of my class. And in school, recognizing that I had a lot of experience that my classmates didn't, because they hadn't had 24 different jobs.
Yeah.
They might have had one or two. and so some of the jobs that I've had have put me in different situations. I was a sheriff's officer. I worked 2 murder trials. I was a head doorman at a nightclub for 2.5 years for the 2,500 people who come through the door every night. So just putting myself in different situations, not necessarily thinking at the time one would lead to the other, but in hindsight, I can look back and kind of put things together on how it worked out. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. I kind of trailed off a little.
Yeah, no. And then so, carry forward a few more years here. And how did you come to think about or be diagnosed with autism?
Sure. So one of the things that I kind of recognized with my ADHD is that I would disassociate. And so I would, and it was kind of a response to trauma to kind of retreat in one's mind into kind of like a fantasy land. And so as a kid, like I've had meltdowns as an adult that I couldn't have as a kid because there wasn't this like it wasn't allowed. Like kids were seen, not heard. Like parents were more concerned about what the neighbors thought than what their kids were actually going through. And so feeling like I couldn't express myself in that way. And so it was all pent up. And so as an adult, I've had to reteach myself how to cry as an adult male and be able to kind of let my emotions come out. And so as an adult, having meltdowns when things don't work out the way that I envisioned. Um, and having this realization that maybe I am autistic. This is the field that I work in, and I think that there's this perception of people who are neurodivergent that somehow the term disability is synonymous with less than, and I really don't subscribe to that at all. Like I would describe us as uniquely gifted and often misunderstood. And so recognizing that I do have certain challenges, absolutely, but that I'm uniquely gifted in certain ways and really honing in on those, and not focusing so much on the things that I can't do, but trying to find workarounds or help with those, but really focusing on the things that I'm good at and then kind of incorporating that into the work that I do with clients.
Hmm. And how does again, I think, autism is something that is poorly understood because it's complicated, much like ADHD. But how did it show up? Like, how did you know that, or how did you suspect that you had autism? What were the signs for you?
Um, Yeah, like it's as clear as day, man. Because I was supposed to give a lecture at a university. Oh, I gave a lecture at a university that day, but I was dehydrated to the point where like I had to go get tests done, not realizing that I was dehydrated. And so people who are on the spectrum, we often don't have the best self care. Um, we do things for others that we have difficulty doing for ourselves.
Hmm.
So like not staying hydrated, not always brushing our teeth when we should, eating properly, forgetting to eat because we're too involved in what we're doing to take time out to do those things, and then all of a sudden becoming hangry because we didn't think ahead to plan those types of things. So for me, it was like literally I was dehydrated. Um, I was extremely sore because I've back problems. And then, of course, when you're dehydrated, it just makes everything that much worse. And with every meltdown, there's kind of this moment of clarity. And the moment of clarity for me in that moment was I might be on the spectrum.
Hmm.
And so then, okay, what steps do I need to take to confirm this? And so then I looked into the process of getting assessed and then went through that. Um, yeah, that was kind of my process of going through it.
That's really interesting because those are, for and I perhaps I don't mind saying that I would be a little bit more aware of some of the associated kind of characteristics or behaviors of people who are neurodivergent, and so I would not have assumed those particular signals. Like that's really interesting for me to hear that those are the things that kind of led you to understand it. Um, and so this all made me think about something you've shared with me previously, which is that you're an empath, so you feel things a lot. Even that if they're not your experience, you absorb emotions from around you. And I guarantee that there are students, currently in our program and will be in the future discover you who also share that characteristic. So can you tell us a little bit about, number one, what does that mean for you being an empath? And number two, how do you manage that? Because, it's hard to sometimes manage all the emotions that come with that characteristic.
Sure. Well, first, I like to tell people that it's not me because I'm awesome, which means it's everybody else. So I want people to know that because there are different types of empaths. So there's the emotional empath, the intuitive empath, there's an animal empath, plant empath, earth empath. I'm sure there's a couple more that I'm missing, but a lot of it has been kind of self-discovery and realizations based on things that happen. So um, I first kind of realized that I was an empath when the company I was working for switched my hotel, and I went from being able to order room service to having to go for the continental breakfast, and the news being on, and me hearing about watching these horrific terrorist acts that had happened, and I actually would put myself there as though I witnessed it firsthand and take on all those emotions, and it set me back. And I remember just again having this conversation with myself, like, why did I do that? So I made a decision right then and there, like, I don't watch the news, I don't read the paper, I don't listen to the radio. I would rather focus my time and energy on things I feel like can affect positive social change than be bogged down by the things I feel I can't.
Hmm.
And so then there's the intuitive type, which I also identify as. So within moments of observing or meeting someone, I know how authentic and genuine they are. And it's a blessing, but it's also a curse because I see through people. Um, Sometimes people will try to present one way, and I know them a different way. And so if I sense that someone's not being genuine, that's not a relationship that I'm going to try to sustain, um, because I am one person no matter where I go. It's the same Shawn. And I might say the wrong thing and I might swear in front of the wrong people, but I'm going to own that. I'm not going to try to pretend to be something that I'm not because I used to do that. And it essentially was masking, trying to be a different version of myself that I thought people wanted me to be rather than just being able to be myself.
Mhm.
And so I talk about social anxiety. So just to back up for a second, if you can imagine that we all kind of have this aura of energy, and people who are neurodivergent, I find, prefer to spend time with people who are younger or people who are older. People our own age are kind of wild cards. People who are younger are innocent, their aura is pure. For people who are older, they're more established, they're more self aware. Um, and so we'll gravitate to both those groups at different times. My wife likes to joke and say that I have a lot of older lady friends, which I do, um, because of my energy. Right? Like I'm not a creep. I'm not someone who's going to hit on them. I like to cook. We just I don't know. We hit it off for some reason. Um, but people who are around our own age are really hard to read. And so when we talk about our peers, I don't really think about peers as people in the same age group. I kind of look at, where are they at emotionally? What age would you put on that? And that's kind of the age that we should be talking to people. But the social anxiety that I experience is from going to a place where people are not as secure in who they are and giving off all these different weird vibes, and me knowing that I'm a sponge for those. And so in order for me to kind of get through that type of environment, it's not, if it's a conference, it's not about the number of business cards that I've collected. It's about the quality of the people that I got them from.
Mhm.
But also the self-awareness of, I know you and I met through the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association for the Leaders of Tomorrow. Um, I went to one of our annual conferences and volunteered. And I didn't care that there were people at the hotel to stack chairs. I did it anyway. I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for me. Whenever our mind has an opportunity to worry or wonder, it'll go there. So again, busy the hands, free the mind. And so I would drive people around. I would do all kinds of different things. For the first time in the organization's history, they recognized a member for their outstanding volunteerism. It was this guy, but I didn't do it for them. I did it for me. So I think also I like to say that um, selfishness can lead to selflessness,
Mm.
right? Like although I did it for me, it benefited other people. So to try and think about things in that way, but also to recognize that if you are secure and very self-aware, the anxiety that you experience in other places is not because of you, it's because of other people and their energy being off. But until people hear this, they often don't know that, right? It just, it's this thing that happens without them really understanding how it happens.
Hmm. So much work that you've done, obviously, to kind of uncover these things and to leverage the strengths within your personality and your experience. I think it's really cool. And I mean, could talk forever about even about this idea of, does altruism actually exist if we're volunteering for ourselves? That's a deep hole that maybe the students will touch upon. But I think we're coming up to our time here. I would have so many more questions for you, but we try to keep it within a certain amount of time. So maybe a couple rapid fire questions, and then we'll wrap up if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So we've talked about some of our main questions already, but what's a lesson that you've learned about relationships?
They have an expiration date. I think that a lot of times we try to hold on to relationships when they may not always be the healthiest because we've been taught that that's what we need to do.
Mm,
I think that over time, sometimes we end up compromising our values for other people, and it can eat away at us. And I think that it's important to kind of identify what your boundaries are, and if people keep encroaching on those, to be mindful. Um, I try to, an exercise I do, Jay, is I try to get people to close their eyes and think about the people in their lives that bring them value. Those are the people to lean into, right? Like Facebook has done a really good job at redefining what it means to be a friend. But they're not our friends. They're mostly acquaintances, right? The people who are truly your friends are the people that when you close your eyes and you can envision their face, they bring you joy and value in your life. They're there and they will help prop you up when you need. Not somebody who's going to try and cut you down at the knees, but somebody who's going to prop you up. And those are the people that I try to lean into and encourage other people to lean into as well.
That's great. Yeah, we do this thing called the authentic circle, which is basically as you described, just writing down those 3 to 5 people or whatever the number is of people who both challenge you and fully embrace who you are and support you. And it's not everybody that's going to do that. So yeah, good advice. Thank you. And I've also learned that sometimes it can be beneficial if things aren't going well in a relationship or we feel disrespected to just to hit pause, not to hit cancel, not to keep going, but just to take some distance. That's been effective for me. Sometimes they're good people, but they're not in a good place, and maybe you're not in a good place, and it's okay to just take a pause. And I think that's important for people to learn that it's not either yes, we're all in or all out. It could just be a break, much like intimate relationships.
Just to add that to that, Jay, there's something that I call the Smith effect. That often when people with ADHD and attentive type start taking medication, they experience a boost of self growth within a relatively short period of time. And the people that we spend time with, the things that we used to find funny, we may have outgrown. The things that we used to connect with people on,
Mm,
we might have outgrown. And so the difficulty is that people can't see that.
mm,
And so when we start to distance ourselves, it's because we've experienced this growth and they haven't. They've been stagnant, and it's not a fault or a slight against them. We were just kind of given this boost that we can then look at relationships, different interactions that we've had. It's almost like we're up here and we can look down at them and look at how what how our interactions affected them, how their interactions affected us, who was kind of in the right and wrong. Sometimes we'll own the things that we did and try to make amends. It's not always reciprocated, and so that can sometimes create a wedge in a relationship that otherwise may have just been left alone had the person not been diagnosed and started taking medication, experience that boost of growth.
mm. Yeah, interesting. Okay. I'd also love to hear, you mentioned traveling to Florida recently quite a bit, but what's your favorite place that you've ever visited and why?
Uh, I don't know that I can say one place really. Like just going to the American universities and seeing how like I'd only ever seen frat houses in movies, and like they are multi-million dollar industries.
Mm.
Like the money that they have, like Florida State had a big top circus tent for one class. Like their new business building that they was in development, their budget was $100 million for one building. Like to see the money that they have, and so like for me to bring my kids last time, like um, for them to hear me speak and to see how the American universities treat guests who come in. University of Miami put us up at the Biltmore Hotel, which is where the president stays when he's in town. And so the other hotels are nice, but I said to my kids like those were nice, but you're gonna really this is something else.
Yeah.
And just to see their faces and like to see like the Ferraris outside, the Audis and the Lambos and the mansions all around, like that's not our life, that's not our world. But like to be able to share that with them and for their jaws to drop and just be in awe, like
Mm.
that for me made it all worthwhile. And one of my business goals is to be able to bring my family when I travel to do these things to share those experiences with them because that really is the joy in it for me.
Yeah, that's so cool. Um, okay, so we'll wrap up with the same question as we always do, and we call these good life conversations because having a good life is more than just what we do at work. It's a combination of hopefully meaningful, fulfilling work, relationships, hobbies, adventure, lifelong learning. So in a world where, we've mentioned Facebook and the reality of social media of today, in a world where it's sometimes confusing for young people to really understand what does it look like to have a good life, what advice do you offer them for them to create their own good life?
Hmm. Well, one of the things I like to tell people is no one ever said being awesome would be easy. There's a mental toll to operate at the level at which we do. So to keep trying and be ready for failure, but don't look at it as failure. Look at it as one step closer to where you want to get. Like you can't get from A to C without going through B. B looks differently for everybody.
Hmm.
I like to tell people, I wouldn't wish my experiences on anyone, but I'm also at a point now in my life where I wouldn't trade them for the world. So go out and have those experiences. Don't be afraid to fail. Go out and do it. Fail forward. Learn something from it, take something from it, and then use that to help you in the next experience.
Great. It's really reinforcing to a message that we share with our students a lot. So I appreciate you sharing some of your failures openly with us and some of your unique gifts and some of the challenges that come with those. And yeah, just really appreciate you and you making the time to do this. Thanks, Shawn.
Uh, Anytime, man. I get goosebumps. I love the stuff.
Okay. Thanks for tuning in. This has been another Good Life conversation. We hope to have you at the next one.